So I'm Nancy Burke. I'm a psychoanalyst in Chicago, and I would like to thank the conference organizers for allowing us this space in which to remember Ann-Louise together and to acknowledge her legacy, personal and professional, to us, with a special welcome to Stu, her husband. I'll say just a few words and then other friends and colleagues will as well. For my part, I'm profoundly grateful for the time I spent with Anne, first as her supervisee of perhaps more than a decade, and then as her friend. She brought me into ISPS and provided more than I can say to my efforts to help my patients. She was a trusted confidant, the guardian of a valued history, and most of all, as a clinician, she was bold, unafraid to articulate difficult or overlooked truths in a way that carried transformative power. I have no idea as to how I decided to ask Anne to be my consultant, but I do remember that first cold call before we'd ever met. Would she supervise me on one of my, as institutes bizarrely call them, control cases for my analytic training? After perhaps a 5-minute call, she dove in headfirst, decisively setting a standing time, and we were launched. Week after week, for many years, we followed the treatment of the person she referred to as our girl, bearing witness to my patient's dreams and conversing with her ghosts as she transformed herself from traumatized Serbian refugee working in a dollar store to family physician and with a family of her own. After I had completed my training hours, we spoke about several others of my patients and then about our lives, our families, and our shared interests, including ISPS. During one of those discussions, she got the grand idea that I should chair a conference in Chicago, although I barely knew the organization then. I can't say that I'm sure how I would have made it through the dark years between my therapist's car accident and his return to practice had I not been able to look forward every week to my talk with Ann-Louise. I have never met anyone who so lived up to what I view as the analyst's credo, first voiced by the Roman former slave and playwright Terence: "Nothing human is alien to me." She was the sort of person to whom you truly could say anything. She was not the sort you could shock or shake from her moorings. She was seemingly without pretense, and she did not suffer fools. That is, you could trust her. I know there were times when she had borne hurts in her life, but she was not afraid or ashamed of her own thoughts, a great and rare gift. And she shared her often startling insights in a way that invited conversation. That kind of eagerness to engage, to feel joy and shared thinking was contagious and profoundly democratic. I have regretted often in the past, and regret even more now, that I stopped our regular meetings when a family crisis temporarily engulfed our resources, temporal, emotional, and financial. I had intended to return when the dust settled, but although we sometimes spoke of resuming regular meetings, the years slipped by, and I couldn't believe that there wouldn't be plenty more of them. For that reason, it was especially meaningful to spend time with Anne at our conference in New Haven, and even more especially meaningful to see how delighted and amazed she was that ISPS-US, once her baby, was alive and thriving, having grown so well in her absence. As a way of recognizing what Anne has given us, ISPS-US has chosen this year to honor Ann-Louise posthumously and retroactively with the Bert Karen Award, offered for a presentation of a psychoanalytic nature at one of our conferences, of which she has given many. I know others would like to honor her as well, so it's my pleasure to call on them now to say a few words, and then if there's time to open it up for comments. First, we will hear from Françoise Devoine, psychoanalyst and author, both in her own right and in collaboration with her late husband, Jean-Marc Scaladier, who has used her own lived experiences profoundly in the service of opening up worlds to her patients and to us, as she did once again just yesterday at our conference. Françoise?
Thank you, Nancy.
Mm-hmm.
Anne and I called each other sisters. I had no sister, and she often took me by the hand, like on that day in Melbourne when she said, "Just join, come with me, join the ISPS-US." This was not the only sign of her huge generosity that Nancy mentioned so well. We met, Jean-Marc and I, Anne at the lodge in the middle of the 80s, just after we discovered Gaetano Benedetti, We did not know him when we were in France. And it was at Rix at the occasion of the Jubilee of Autowheel. And we saw that extraordinary clinician. So both, and as you said, Nancy too, much better than I do, both Benedetti became our mentors. She introduced me to the work of Frida from Reichmann, unknown in France too, and we shared constantly our experience of psychoanalysis for extreme states. As you said, Nancy, she was an exquisite clinician, very bold, I like your word, as well as a wide reader. I don't know if you say that in English. She had a lot of reading in literature, which pleased me very much. When she visited me in Paris, us in Paris, she wished to visit Gertrude Stein house. We made a pilgrimage, which is next door in Montparnasse. And I liked that. She was nourished by her reading. And also, she was a strong supporter when we and I encountered difficulties in our colleagues, among our colleagues in France. And she was very, very giving a lot of energy. She was, as you said, I just go on your tracks. I trusted her completely. And I admired her selfless leadership. That was for me always something I rediscovered. As well as the way, I loved the way that she knitted during the conferences. You know, I would be so unable to do that. So I was as admiring her knitting as her talk. Our conversations were full of laughter. We mixed together serious clinical issues, family stories, surrealist comments, and hilarious criticisms. We loved to make fun of ridiculous whatever. Okay. And that was in the presence of Stu, our dear friend. I give him my salute today. And who was his unconditional knight. And he is such linked to our meetings with Anne. They visited us several times in Paris, and now as I climb on my terrace, where you see, you have a view on Paris, and where we spent so many good moments, every evening I look at the stars to say hello to Jean-Max. But now I will say hello to Anne and say to her, I love you. You are my guiding star. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian Kohler is a former president of ISPS-US, an associate editor of the ISPS journal Psychosis, and was an ISPS executive committee board member. He's an adjunct associate professor at NYU, Columbia, and CUNY in private practice, and a longtime friend of Anne's.
Thank you. I have tears in my eyes now after listening to both of you in your tribute to Anne. In a recent contact, hi Stu, if you're in the audience, he did want me to send his thanks to ISPS members for their support and friendship to Anne over the years. My first contact with Anne was 30 years ago She was very helpful when I had to teach psychiatric resident psychotherapy. She sent me a ton of literature. Julie Kip, my lifelong soulmate, and I visited her at Chestnut Lodge many times, and we stayed over her and Stu's home in Maryland and visited her and Stu up at the family farm in Shenango County, upstate New York. Anne was deeply in love with Stu, her adult children, and grandchildren. We loved her and Stu. Julie and David Feinsilver and I, and a small group of friends from New York and Chicago, including Dave Garfield, met in the library of Chestnut Lodge Hospital to plan the formal start of ISPS-US with Ann as its first president. David was ill at the time, then he passed. The New York City ISPS group had started a few years before in Manhattan, then with Ann becoming president and we formalized it, it really took off. Ann, Bert, Karen, and I had marvelous weekly phone calls. We wrote articles together. I was so impressed with Ann's honesty and interpersonal directness, as well as her dedication to her work. And like Francois was saying, oh, I should put the pictures up if I can find them. Her needlepoint. I don't know if you guys, can everyone see those slides?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Okay. So this is Anne. And I put this quote from Virgil: the way things are calls for our tears, and mortality touches our hearts. And there's a photo of her with Stu, who accompanied her to the ISPS conferences in various countries, etc. And yes, both of them had a great sense of humor and would lift our spirits. And there's Anne with her needlepoint. That's a great photo. I think Jens took that. Here's another where she's talking about Sullivan and his possible hospitalization, Oak Grove Sanitarium. Let me just lower this. Okay. Although I believe she prescribed meds, I think she clearly was very critical of their overuse or even their use. She planned to resurrect Chestnut Lodge in a different iteration, but at an 11th hour, investors, I think, backed out. It was a delight meeting Ann and Stu in various countries. She was fiercely devoted to promoting psychotherapy for persons experiencing distressing voices and beliefs, and this was evident in her work, her many books. I don't know if you can all see this, a great book, Psychoanalysis and Psychosis. She was planning to write a book. She thought of about her experiences at the lodge. Stu had mentioned recently to me the Great Debate in Melbourne, and I think he's going to try to get us to film. So I'll just end on that. Guess now who holds the death, I said. This is from Elizabeth Barrett Browning. But there the silver answer rang, not death, but love. That's from Sonnets from the Portuguese. May her memory be a blessing for all of us, for her family, friends, patients, and colleagues who loved her. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Can we get off screen sharing? Because I can't get to my. Brian, do you know how to do that?
Do I do that?
I think so.
Yeah, just you can at the top click stop share.
I see new share. Oh, okay. I got it. Good.
Okay. Okay, great. Let's see. Sorry about this. 1 second. Let's see. So next, Jim Gorney will speak. He is a psychoanalyst in independent practice in Knoxville, Tennessee, a graduate of the University of Chicago and the William Allenson White Psychoanalytic Institute. He was a member of the supervisory staff at the Austin Riggs Center and has taught at New York Hospital Cornell, Duquesne, and the University of Tennessee. He is the author of numerous articles and chapters on Lacan, Winnicott, self-psychology, Erikson, and innovations in psychoanalytic technique. Jim?
Yes. I came to know Ann just over the past 20 years through ISPS, although I knew of her before then via her sterling reputation. As we all know, she was formed at Chestnut Lodge, and she often spoke of wanting to write a book called Lessons from the Lodge. But in fact, Ann was the lesson from the Lodge. She personified the psychosocial interpersonal treatment of extreme states. Now, since she has won the Bert Karen Award, I thought I would just read two brief examples of her writing so we could hear her voice. The first one is about Chestnut Lodge. She characterized Lodge clinicians as adopting an interpersonal approach, quote, in which therapists actively use their personalities, hoping to develop a comfortable working relationship with each patient. We follow each patient's lead, sharing activities in which the patient feels relatively calm, while listening for transference themes and being alert to shifts and counter-transference. We see shared playfulness as intrinsic to a return to mental health. We monitor body language, our patients and our own. We don't mask our reactions with blank expressions. Our patients know where we stand. And everybody knew where Ann-Louise stood. Second quote, while at Chestnut Lodge, she developed a life-threatening cancer. She had many operations, and she returned to work. And she said, now that I'm regaining strength and health, I do remember vividly that my patients were striving. Where is the other page? That the patients were striving with me, working to get through the sessions, then to get something from them, then to reestablish the former equilibrium. That is, they worked to rebuild the holding environment, and I struggled to assist them. I observed their efforts gratefully, and I'm confident that they perceived my being grateful. I have a special fondness for the patients who saw me through those months. We are like veterans who fought together in the front lines. Sometimes when they reminisce about those times, I imagine we're like ex-GIs sitting over beers at a local bar. So whether we drink beer or not, let us all join you, Ann-Louise, in fellowship together, which is exactly the kind of relationship she established with the people in her care. Here's to you, Ann.
L'chaim, yeah. Georges Tisson is not here. He was going to speak about his reminiscences when Ann-Louise visited Barcelona and what it was like to receive her, but hopefully maybe he'll pop in at the end. I think the time change was a question. In the meanwhile, I'd like to introduce Brian Martindale, past chair of the International ISPS and an honorary life member. He founded the European Federation of Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy in 1980 and is its honorary president. He is a retired medical psychotherapist and psychoanalyst with several years of experience in an NHS service exclusively for people experiencing psychosis. And he worked with Ann-Louise on the reorganization of ISPS. Brian?
Thank you, Nancy, and a big thank you for bringing us all together to honor the life of our most distinguished colleague, Ann-Louise Silver. I'm very pleased to be alongside Françoise and hopefully Jorge in representing her international contributions. And in that respect, I'm very pleased that her husband, Stu, is with us, as I think I remember that he was with her on nearly all occasions when Anne traveled internationally. My first contact with Ann-Louise was in 1991 at the ISPS conference in Stockholm. This was when I fell in love with ISPS and its remarkable demonstrations of psychoanalytic and psychosocial contributions to psychosis. And I've got vivid memories of going for a walk in Stockholm with Ann-Louise, and she clearly must have made a big impression on me, because I remember not the walk so clearly, but clearly remember meeting Ann-Louise. We met on a number of occasions in the next few years, sometimes at my home in London in the 1990s, and there were two main themes. We met with a group of international colleagues whose names may be familiar to many of you: Arlenen, Kullberg, Ugelstad, Furlan, and in the early years before his illness, David Fine-Silver. We had two main tasks. Of course, in the first instance, it was supporting the forthcoming Washington conference in 1994. Then subsequently, during that time and subsequently, we were preparing to transform ISPS into a more substantial organization from beyond the one that hosted these important international meetings every 3 years. And one of the key ideas was to build or support the development of national or local networks. And Ann-Louise was the first coordinator of what became the very substantive ISPS-US network, of which this meeting is a descendant. I also remember an important meeting in Perugia, organized by Maurizio Peciccia, with many of the people I've just mentioned, and where Anne was. And this is where next year's ISPS meeting will be. I could say a lot more, but I want first of all to reinforce our awareness of Ann-Louise's dedication to psychoanalytic contributions to psychosis, and of course her love of Chestnut Lodge, and her considerable reservations of the introduction of medication there. Perhaps Ann-Louise at times somewhat idealized the longer-term outcomes of many people trapped in a psychotic world. But the most important thing I want to convey is the enormous respect that existed in the international community in those who came into contact with her. And in recent days, in anticipation of this event, I've been in contact with Kullberg, Arlenen, Jan Olav Johannesson, Bent Rosenbaum, and even Ehrlich, all of whom want to convey without any hesitation their pleasure at having known Ann-Louise, their respect for her as a person, her mind, and her thoughtfulness. And they all want me to pass on their condolences to Stu. Thank you, Nancy.
Thanks so much. So we have 5 minutes, and the hope was that we could, if anyone else wanted to speak or say a word about Ann-Louise at this time, you can, I think, raise your hand in the chat. And
Yes, please raise your hand,
Yeah.
and I can call on you to speak. So we'll have Jess go first. All right, you should be all set, Jess.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, my name is Jessica Arnell. I'm a past president of ISPS-US, and I just thought nobody mentioned Anne's laugh, and she had an amazing laugh. She would just laugh and cackle. She had a great sense of humor, and I will definitely miss that about her. You know, I must admit I was a little intimidated when I first met, and she was just sort of a whirling dervish, and so bright and so knowledgeable, and you know, and opinionated. And you know, I remember seeing her also, I think it was last in New Haven, and she had just come and she just had a disagreement with someone. I think it was Gail Hornstein. I don't know what it was about, but she was so heated and worked up, and I thought, wow, she's still, you know, and I know it was not something petty with some sort of ideological disagreement about something, and just her continued passion after all these years was just really something to behold. And I want to echo what other people have said about her generosity, and she was always wanting to mentor and encourage young people and others who are interested in this topic. She's definitely will be missed. And I am glad to see Stu is still here, because you know, he was not just Ann's sidekick. He also has a lot of knowledge and you know, wealth of information and wisdom as well to share with us. So I hope we'll keep seeing him as well. So that's all I'm going to add. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jess. Does anyone else have a hand raised? I can't see that. Let's see, and nobody in the chat, I think. And so I guess, and we're just about to get ready for the next presentation, which we're very excited about. So should we take 2 minutes and reconvene back?
Sounds
And
good. So
yeah, just
we can.
thanks to everyone, and thanks to Ann and for all that she was and still is, and may her memory be for a blessing.